Good evening, everyone. This is Chef Heather at the Sweet and Savory Classroom. I want to welcome you to our class this evening. We are going to be making cheesecake. Cheesecake is one of those awesome desserts that most everyone loves. Just a few things before we really get into it here. The pan that I'm using this evening is an 8-inch pan, which is kind of small, but it's 3 inches deep. So it's going to be kind of a high cheesecake. You could also, on your sheet, it also said that you could use a 9-inch pan or a 10-inch pan. And if those are 2 inches high, you'll be fine. If you have extra batter, I just wouldn't, overflow your pan, but we'll talk about that. And so this is the pan that I'm going to be using. Also, if you haven't pulled your cream cheese out of the refrigerator, you're going to want to go ahead and do that. Go ahead and get it diced up a little bit. It's okay if it's cold, but we need it to be softened a little bit. And so if yours is still sitting in the fridge and you were waiting until we started class, go ahead, pull it out, cut it into cubes. And I'm actually not opposed to you sticking in the microwave for a very small amount of time, just to kind of help get it softened. But I would do that once you have it cut into the cubes, okay? And then another thing is you need to go ahead and turn on your oven. And so we're gonna turn it on to 375. That'll be the temperature that we are toasting the graham cracker crust that's gonna be on the bottom. And then once our graham cracker crust is done, I wanna tell you now, in case I forget, leave the oven at 375. Just to keep the temperature high, and then we won't actually turn it down for the cheesecake until we've placed the cheesecake into the oven. And that's a little trick in the baking world. We would increase the temperature by 50 to 75 degrees so that whenever we were loading the oven and we're going to be doing a water bath, it loses at least 50 degrees or more. And then that way it'll be the proper temperature whenever your cheesecake starts baking. So along with your cake pan or springform pan and foil, if you're using springform pan, if you're using a cake pan, you are not going to need any foil. You are also going to need some sort of, I just have a baking pan here. So you need some sort of pan that has an edge on it. This doesn't have a very high edge. It's only about 1 inch or 1.25 inches. But I need something that my pan's gonna fit on. Now this is plenty big. I could put 2 cheesecakes on here, but you're gonna wanna find something at your house, whether it's a 9x13 pan or a baking pan, casserole dish, something that you're gonna be able to sit your cheesecake in so that we can do the water in the pan, okay? So I'm gonna give you a few minutes, get your cream cheese diced up, get it sitting off to the side. Go ahead, and if there's anything that I mentioned that you don't have ready, go ahead and get that. And then the first thing we'll be working on will be the graham cracker crust. So you just need the 2 ingredients, the graham cracker and the butter. Now, when we're doing these virtual classes, and I hope I'm not telling you too much at one time, we'll have lots of time to talk. But when we're doing these virtual classes, we do suggest that you have the ingredients ready before class. But I know some of you might not be able to do that. You might have come from work, or there's a reason that you weren't really able to prepare in advance. You should still have plenty of time to measure your ingredients. Most all of the ingredients, unless it said each or a teaspoon or a tablespoon, most of it was done by weight. And so whenever we're using weight, it does need to be done on a scale. Water, 1 cup of water is 8 ounces. But 1 cup of granulated sugar is 7 ounces. So we have to remember, if you're not using weight, if you haven't weighed, then you may want to ask me hey, I don't have a scale. Can you help me out with this measurement? How much should I measure? I'm happy to do that. I can even measure it and figure it out. If I need to do that for you, just let me know. Okay. And then if it said FL.OZ, that's fluid ounces. And that means that it should have been measured into a liquid measuring cup. Okay. All right. That's a lot. So I am gonna give you a few minutes to go ahead, make sure you turn your oven on 375. If you have convection, you can use convection for the crust part, but then we'll need to turn it to regular bake for the cheesecake, okay? And I always check my oven too, because sometimes there's surprises in there. So you always see me turning when we have a full class, all 4 ovens, and I open each one and make sure they're all good. All right, so we have our ovens on 375, and I'm gonna go ahead, I'm just using my induction burner here, but I'm gonna go ahead and start to melt my butter. So as far as the graham cracker crust goes, you need 5 ounces of graham cracker crumbs and 1.8 ounces of butter. I will say that the store, when I went to the store, they didn't have any graham cracker crumb, and I've done this before where I take the whole graham crackers. So I took the whole graham crackers and I ground them up in my food processor to make my graham cracker crumb. Okay, so you don't necessarily need to buy crumb. You can definitely use the whole graham crackers. And that's a fun way for you to use the other types of graham crackers that are out there as well, like chocolate, and there's that cinnamon. And so if you wanted to use a different one, you could do that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and melt my butter. So get your butter melting. We want to be careful with this small amount of butter. I mean, I have such a big pot. We want to make sure we don't brown the butter at all. It shouldn't be browned or toasted. And so I'm going to start it out slow here. And then I have a nice big bowl. I tend to use a smaller bowl, which seems like it's going to fit right. But then what ends up happening is as I'm mixing it, the graham cracker is so light that it flies out. So I like to use a bowl that's a little bit bigger. And I'm going to go ahead and pour my graham cracker crumb in there. All right, and while my butter is melting, let's talk about, as far as greasing your pan, I'm just gonna use a regular pan spray, but you could also use butter or vegetable shortening or something else that you have at your house. And then also, I'm gonna line the bottom with parchment paper. So I have a piece of parchment paper here. I'm gonna show you how to cut it from the bottom of your pan. And my butter melting. So let me switch back over here. And let's talk about, mine's starting to sizzle. I'm going to turn it down a little bit so I don't burn it. And let's talk about this parchment paper and my pan. So we get sheets of parchment paper. So they come in a rectangle, which yours might be on a roll. And you're going to fold it in half if you have a sheet like mine. Otherwise, you'll just pull out enough that you're going to be able to. My butter's going crazy over here. All right, I'm going to shut mine off for a little bit because the induction, I love the induction, but it only goes so low. So I place it on the paper. I go ahead and trace it with a pen, the outside of the pan as close as I can, okay? And so I think you can see my circle there. And then what I do is I take a pair of scissors. So I'm going to get 2 out of 1 sheet. We use these a lot for these pans. So I'll use it at some point. But I cut right on the inside of the line where I traced around the pan. For one, we don't want pen or marker or pencil in our cake, our cheesecake. But also, if we're tracing the outside of the pan, we need it to be a little bit smaller. So if we cut it on the inside of the circle, it should be the right size to fit in the bottom of the pan. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of this scrap. And so my butter is melted and it's just sitting, waiting, it's off. And so go ahead and get your parchment cut and get it fitting into the bottom of your pan there, okay? And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna go ahead and spray. So spray the bottom, and this is without the parchment, so I took it back out. I made sure it fit, and then I took it out, spraying the sides really good and the bottom. You know, you can go too heavy. If it's dripping down or running, then you've gotten a little too much, and you might need to take a paper towel and blot some of it off. But you want it to be heavy and foamy looking when you're using the spray, but not dripping or puddling into the pan. And then you're going to put your paper down in there, make sure it's secure all the way around, and then you're going to spray on top of the paper as well, okay? So I call this spray paper spray because we're spraying the pan so that it comes out of the pan, we're spraying the paper so that it comes off of the cheesecake because we don't want to serve our cheesecake with paper, right? All right. So I'm going to go back to my graham cracker crust here. So I'm going to go ahead and pour my butter into my graham cracker. And I'm going to use a spatula here and really get it scraped out so that it's using all of that butter. You know, it's funny. I've seen some graham cracker recipes or graham cracker crust, excuse me, recipes that say to add sugar. And it's really not necessary to add sugar to graham cracker because graham cracker already has a lot of sugar in it. So what I do is I just use straight ground graham cracker and the butter, get it mixed together where it starts to look thick like this. And then you're going to go in with one of your hands. And it's like you're going to pick it up and just kind of really rub it together to make sure that that butter is getting absorbed into all that dry graham cracker. Okay, so I'm picking it up and I'm just kind of rubbing it with my hand, making sure everything is getting absorbed. I like to do my crust just on the bottom of the pan. I know you'll see cheesecake a lot of different ways. Some people put cheesecake up the side and on the bottom. I find that if you do it on the bottom, then it doesn't crumble away whenever you're cutting it. And you also see that nice layer of graham cracker and then where the cheesecake starts, and it all comes out of the pan. So there's definitely benefits to just putting it onto the bottom of the pan. So what you're going to do is you're going to dump it into the bottom of your pan. I got a little on my table. Scoop up the rest of that. Put it in here. And then I just take my hand and I carefully, I'm not pressing it down yet, but I'm just carefully spreading it around and getting an even layer. It's going to be very fluffy right now. Okay. So I'm just getting it spread out, getting an even layer. All right. And then think about something that you might have at your house. It's funny, like the can on my spray is nice and flat on the top. So it works really good to press my graham cracker down. So you could use your hand. And if you use your hand, what I would suggest is turning your hand over and bending it a little bit and using it like this to press. Okay. Or you can find something that's very flat on the bottom, like a glass or a plastic container. And you can actually come through and carefully start to pack all the graham cracker together. The better it's packed together, the better it'll stay in one piece whenever you cut your cheesecake. So go ahead and press it really good. You can see how fluffy it is before we press it down because it really goes, I mean, mine went down like 1/4 of an inch as I was pressing it. And I've got it all pressed nicely. Just going around the edge, trying to get some of the edge as good as the rest of it. Okay, so if all you have is your hand, then that'll work too. And you'll use your hand like this. So use the outside of your hand bent and press on the bottom. It's a little easier than trying to get your hand down inside a pan the other direction. All right. So we have our graham cracker crust ready to go into the oven. And I'm going to go ahead and put mine in the oven. You're not going to go on a pan. You're just going to go straight into the oven on the rack. And I like to do 8 minutes. I feel like that's the perfect amount of time in my oven. You could go up to 10. But what's going to happen is it's actually going to start to smell done. I don't know if you know, in all the cooking or the baking that you've done, if you've noticed, like when something is done, you're like, oh, that smells done. I better check that. The graham cracker will be the same way. So after about 8 minutes, I'll be like, yesterday, I made a cheesecake so I could show you how to take one out of the pan. And yesterday I was like, oh, is my timer still going for that graham cracker crust? Because it smells done. And I looked over and there was 2 seconds left on the timer. So go ahead, put yours into the oven, get it toasting. Make sure you set a timer. So like I said, I'm going to do 8 minutes. And just to remind everyone, I have my oven at 375. I'm going to get cleaned up because I have a little bit of graham cracker crumb here. That'll allow you all to get finished up and get your countertop cleaned. And then we're going to go ahead and move into our cheesecake batter. Okay. So you can start getting ingredients when you're finished, getting ingredients ready for your cheesecake batter. So you're going to want either a hand mixer or a stand mixer to mix this because it's going to be a lot of mixing. And so I have my KitchenAid mixer over here that you can see. And we're going to be, if you're using the KitchenAid or your stand mixer, you need a paddle attachment. If you're using your hand mixer, you'll use the beaters. So I'm going to start going through those ingredients. So I have my cream cheese, and I also have granulated sugar. So right now I have the screen set up so that you can see the table view and you can see me. So if you're having trouble seeing both, because you definitely need to be able to see the table view. If you're having trouble seeing both, let me know, because for some reason, some of our classes, there might be one person that isn't able to see the table, and that's kind of our problem because you need to be able to see what we're doing. All right, so I've got my cream cheese, I have my sugar, I also have my eggs. I haven't cracked them quite yet. I have 4 eggs. And I also have a little bit of cake flour. I really like what the cake flour does to batter. If you need to be gluten-free at your house, you could use the tapioca flour. That would help thicken it up, just so it's a really nice consistency whenever you go to cut the cheesecake. I also have some vanilla extract. If you wanted to use a different extract, you certainly could. I would recommend using a pure extract so you get a true flavor come through. I have a lemon to get some lemon zest. I'm going to be using a microplane to do that. You could use a zester, or you could just cut pieces off and chop it. And then I also have my heavy cream measured out here. And we already have our pan good to go and in the oven. So cheesecake is one of those things that gets creamed for a really long time. So what's going to happen here is we're going to cream and we're going to scrape. But I found that if you go through steps of like, the first step, we're going to add the cream cheese and the sugar, okay? And then we're going to mix it for about only a minute, and we're going to scrape. And then we're going to do that again for 1 minute and scrape. And after we've gotten it a little bit softened, we can go up to 3 minutes. And then after that, we can go to 5 minutes. So there can be a little bit more time in between. So we're going to be mixing. It's going to be loud at your house. It's going to be loud here. And so go ahead and put all of your cream cheese into your mixing bowl. Okay, and I'm going to switch over to the other view. I'm going to put all of my cream cheese into my mixer. All right, losing a little bit of it. It's a lot of cream cheese. Probably, you know, usually for recipes, we're used to like 1 block of cream cheese from the grocery store. This cheesecake has a lot of cream cheese in it. And then we're going to add the sugar. The sugar is going to help provide friction to get this creamed really well. And so it's just the cream cheese and the sugar right now. We're going to lower the mixer. So we're on step number 1 under the cheesecake. We're going to lock the mixer down if you're using a KitchenAid. If you're using a hand mixer, you're going to either want someone else to hold your bowl for you, or you're going to need to get a really good firm grip on your bowl that you're mixing so that you can mix with one hand and hold that bowl really well with the other hand. And that is my graham cracker crust. So let's see what we've got here. Oh, it looks good. So let me show you. And again, don't turn your oven down yet. Leave it at 375. Okay, so you can see you may not be able to see the color difference, but you see how it's cracked around the outside edge a little bit against the pan. You're looking for it to be a little cracked near the edge. And also there's going to be a ring of graham cracker around the outside edge that's a little bit more brown than the rest of it. And it's going to smell done too, okay? And so I'm going to sit this somewhere so it can cool. The top of the oven is not a good place to cool things because the oven is very hot. So sit it somewhere off to the side. Yours will probably be coming out in the next couple of minutes as well. And so I've locked down my mixer. We talked about the hand mixer, you know, holding onto the bowl really, really well. And what we're going to do is we're going to slowly go up to speed 6. And so let's go to speed 6 here slowly. I don't want to kick any of my sugar out. So I'm going to start on speed 1, and then I'm going to go up to 2, and then to 4, and then go ahead and go up to 6. It's going to be kind of loud. What it's going to do is speed 6 is a higher speed than what we typically use to cream. You know, if you've taken my classes before, usually we're around speed 4. Okay, I'm going to put this on speed 6. Let's mix this for 1 minute, okay? And then we're going to go ahead and scrape it down, okay? So as far as the crust goes, we sprayed our cake pan. I used a pan spray. We cut a piece of parchment paper for in the bottom of the pan. So we sprayed the pan, we did the parchment, we sprayed on top of the parchment paper. And then what we did is we melted the butter, put it over the graham cracker in the bowl, mixed it together with our hand real good. We kind of like squeezed it and brushed it through our hand. And then we patted it tightly into the bottom of the pan. And it gets baked at 375, just like your recipe says. And mine, 8 minutes is perfect on my oven. So I'm sure this has been a minute. Some of you might be timing a little bit better than I was. But I'm going to go ahead and do a scrape now. Now, when we're scraping, it's important to get the sides all the way to the bottom, especially if you're using the KitchenAid. The KitchenAid has that raised dimple in the bottom, and we got to make sure we get scraped around that. And so the reason we only, mix for about a minute or so is that it'll end up a little bit too lumpy if we let it mix too long. So we need to make sure that the stuff that's attached to the bowl, like when we start mixing, it throws it out to the outside of the bowl. We need to make sure that stuff gets scraped and moved into the middle often so that everything stays the same temperature. And so I'm scraping my attachment as well. Okay, and I am going to show you a little trick because I like to use my hand to do this, and you all can decide. Some people, would rather use a tool to do it rather than get their hands in there. Okay, so Michelle, it sounds like you're good. Okay, you have plenty of time to get that crust done because we're going to be creaming this for quite some time. But as far as this attachment goes, to get it scraped really well, because there's a lot of cream cheese on there. Okay, see all that cream cheese? What I do is I take just 2 fingers and I trace my attachment, and it helps clean everything off without my whole hand getting in there, okay? So I just take 2 fingers and I go through and I trace my attachment and try to keep my hand rather clean. And then I just have a dry towel nearby because we're gonna be scraping this a lot. So I have my dry towel on my side, and I just wipe the little bit of batter that's on my hands, I wipe it off. And then I can keep going without having to go wash my hands like 10 times. So now we're going to do another 1 minute approximately on speed 6, okay? So speed 6. And if you're using the hand mixer, that's probably going to be close to high speed. I'd go as high as you can without it splattering out if you're using the little hand mixer. Mine already looks rather creamy, and yours might as well. That sugar and the high speed helps provide friction faster, and it actually creams a lot faster than some things. I just do the 60 seconds by, it feels like 60 seconds. My clock doesn't have a second hand on it. And it seems silly to set a timer for a minute, but you can definitely do that. If you're doing that at your house, I'm proud of you because I'm a perfectionist. So if you're setting a timer for 1 minute at your house, you're a perfectionist, very similar to me probably. So 1 minute, we're scraping again, okay? And I mean, this can get old if we keep doing 1 minute, but after this, we're gonna do about 3 minutes, and I'm gonna set a timer so that I can kind of follow along with you guys. After we do the 3 minutes, we'll increase it to 5 minutes, okay? And then after that 5 minutes, I'm hoping that it's really close to done. If not done, okay? Creaming. Now, cheesecake, if you think about when you eat a piece of cheesecake, how creamy it is, that's pretty important when we're making it. If there's big lumps of cream cheese in the batter, it may not seem like a big deal because there's a lot of of batter. But as we start adding the cream and the eggs to it and it gets more liquid, if there's a lump of cream cheese in there, you can really tell. It's actually a very different consistency than the rest of the batter. And cream cheese is white in comparison to the rest of the batter. So when you cut into your cheesecake, if there's big lumps in it, you can certainly see it. If there's little, we don't worry. So, all right. So we scraped it down again. And now we're going speed 6 for 3 minutes, okay? So I'm actually gonna set a timer this time. You can go ahead. I'm sure some of you are getting your other ingredients ready. You can get your eggs cracked. You can get some of your, if you want to get your zest taken care of, you can do that. This would be a good time. I'm just doing my zest here on my microplane. Just getting the really bright yellow part of the lemon. And if you like lemon a lot, you could add more. If you want it to just kind of be a hint of, ooh, what is that? Doing just 1 teaspoon is plenty. Because we're not making lemon cheesecake, we're just complementing the flavor of the vanilla and adding a little bit of something interesting rather than just vanilla by itself. You could also add a little bit of cinnamon or another type of spice that you really like. That would be nice. Also, that's my timer. Also, this cheesecake is rather forgiving. So you can add pumpkin and make it pumpkin cheesecake because pumpkin is so thick that whenever you add it to a custard, it's going to set rather nicely. And the flour will help with that still. You could also make chocolate, and that's where you would melt some pure chocolate. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when we make our chocolate sauce. You could melt chocolate and you could add melted chocolate to the cheesecake. So you could definitely do different flavors with this. So we did the 3 minutes. I'm scraping. I hope you all are having fun with your cream cheese and your sugar. Make sure if you're using your KitchenAid that you're getting around that dimple on the bottom. Getting everything scraped really well. I talked about how I like to get my hands in here, so I'm using those 2 fingers to trace out my attachment. Now this time we're going to 5 minutes, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago. So we're going to go to 5 minutes, and if I'm ahead of you, that's okay. We're going to 5 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. And if you don't have your other ingredients ready, go ahead and get those ready. Since it is going to be 5 minutes of mixing, also, if you're prepared with this, but you haven't measured your ingredients for if you're making the raspberry sauce or the chocolate sauce or both, you can go ahead and start getting that ready as well. I'm going to set another timer. I'm on speed 6, okay? Yes, only the cream cheese and sugar are still in the mixer, okay? We have to make sure that we have this completely creamed and smooth before we add anything else. Otherwise, it'll definitely have lumps in it. Mine's looking really nice and creamy. Whenever you're mixing on your bowl, even with your hand mixer or with your stand mixer, you can look down inside your mixing bowl off to the side where it would be where the batter is against the wall. And as it's mixing, you can actually see if there's lumps in it or not. When the paddle comes around, it thins it out a little bit and you can actually see, and mine has very minimal. Like at this point, they're starting to become the size of like a pinhead to really, really small. And like I said, after this 5 minutes, it should be done. If you drive yourself crazy, like just keep mixing, scraping, and not really setting a little bit of a time to it, whenever you can go a little bit longer, like the 3 minutes and the 5 minutes, you'll be wasting a lot of time just scraping and it's not mixing. So we did 1 minute, just to review, we did 1 minute. We've used speed 6 the whole entire time. So first step, we did 1 minute and then we scraped. The second step, we did 1 minute and then we scraped again. The third step, we did 3 minutes and then we scrape. And now we're on 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes on speed 6, it should be close to ready, if not ready. All right, that is my timer. So what I'm gonna do, so like I said, that was our 5 minutes. I am gonna scrape it again because we're gonna be adding other ingredients. So I want all the cream cheese down in there, but I'm also gonna check it out and make sure that it's creamed as much as I'd like it to be creamed. So I'm scraping around the outside of the bowl again, around the dimple again, and then I'm gonna take my 2 fingers and I scrape my spatula and then go ahead and trace out my attachment to help get all of that scraped down. Now, what you can do from here, if you want to like kind of check it, it's hard to tell whenever you're looking at the batter. You might be like, oh, it looks smooth to me, but it's in one lump, okay? So if we take some and we spread it out on, you could spread out on a knife, or you can see it really well on my hand because of the blue glove, that I don't actually see any lumps. I see some air pockets, but I don't see any lumps. It's actually really, really smooth. So if you spread it out thinner, either on a spatula or a knife or something that you can see through it, you're gonna be able to tell whether or not there's any lumps left. If you have lumps left and you're like, well, I really want it to be smooth, then you go ahead and mix longer. I definitely want you to have it as smooth as what you'd like. If you're like, that's a lot more scraping and mixing than I normally do, I am happy with it. That's up to you, okay? But I would definitely, it's gonna cream. So if you feel like it's not quite there, then do another creaming, maybe another 3 minutes, and then check it out, okay? And so you see this step number 2 is slowly add the egg one at a time, okay? So what we're gonna do with this is I'm gonna lock down my mixer again, and I'm only gonna put it on stir, which is speed 1 on my KitchenAid. And I'm gonna go ahead and try to only let 1 yolk drop into my mixer. So I'm gonna, drop 1 in there. If you drop 2, it's okay. Just let it mix longer, okay? So you can see it mixing, and I'm gonna spotlight my table so that you have a little bit closer view of my mixer. And now that that egg's mixed in, I'm gonna go ahead and add another. So I've got my second egg. I'm gonna let that mix in before I add the next one, okay? So again, we're on step number 2 underneath the cheesecake, and we're adding our eggs one at a time. And if yours is still creaming, then you can just glean all of this teaching while yours is mixing. Okay. And now I'm gonna add my last egg. So in between the eggs, I do not scrape. I don't scrape until all the egg has been added. And so now we're gonna have to do another scrape. It's really, really difficult to get cheesecake batter completely smooth. And I know it seems like a lot of scraping, but for it to be properly smooth, it does take this much scraping, okay? All right, so I'm scraping it down again. You'll see that there is, a difference between the mixture on the bowl and in the middle, because the stuff on the outside of the bowl is just the cream cheese and sugar. It hasn't actually gotten mixed in yet. All right. So now we're going to move on to step number 3, okay? Step number 3 is add the flour and mix until well combined, okay? And after we add the flour, we do not need to scrape it again. So I'm going to go ahead, add the flour, and I'm going to get that mixed in on a low speed. And I'm just gonna make sure it's all absorbed before I start adding anything else. I can still see a little bit around my paddle attachment that still needs to mix in, okay? So how are we doing out there? Are we doing okay? All right, so I mixed in my flour. Like I said, we don't need to scrape, and it doesn't tell you to scrape on your handout either. But now we're gonna add the vanilla, the lemon zest, and the heavy cream, and then we do have to do one more scrape, and that's gonna be the last one, okay? And so I'm gonna scoop up my lemon zest here and put that in. I'm gonna measure out my vanilla, so it's 1.5 teaspoons if you're using the vanilla extract. There's 1. A half. Be really careful with this big bottle. Okay, so it doesn't just dump in. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn that to speed 1 and go ahead and pour my heavy cream in. You know, heavy cream is so thick, it coats the inside of your measurement. So you're going to want to try to get that scraped out and into the mixer as well. Okay, or at least the best that you can. All right. So now all of your ingredients should be in your bowl. And I'm going to go ahead and do that last scrape. Okay. So at this point, you all, dirty hands. Okay, that's good. So we've got doing great. We've got some goods out there. Dirty hands. I can definitely imagine you have dirty hands. This is a lot of scraping. So I always tell everybody, try not to lose too much batter with all this scraping. Like if we have a lot of batter on our hands every time we scrape, or a bunch ends up on the table, we can lose a lot of our batter. And so you notice, like, I try to keep everything scraped off inside the bowl so that I can keep as much of my batter as possible. And so this is going to be the last and final scrape. And then I'm going to go ahead and just do another stir for about 15 to 30 seconds on second speed. Looking good. Looks smooth. Looks custardy. A little bit yellow because of all those egg yolks that we added with the whole egg. All right. And then your batter is ready to go. All right, so earlier, if you missed it, it's okay. I'm just going to go over it again. We talked about the importance of having a pan to sit your cheesecake pan on, because we're going to be putting some water in this. Now, this is just a baking pan that has about a 1 inch or might be 1.25 inch wall around the outside of it, but you could use a casserole dish. You could use something else that you have that your pan will fit down inside, that you're gonna be able to put a little bit of water in here. Some people have the misconception that the water has to come all the way up to the pan, but it does not. It just has to be sitting in water. So the water can be only a 1/2 inch deep if that's what your pan allows, okay? So we've got our pan, I've got my crust ready to go. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna carefully pour my batter into my pan, because if we pour it too hard, too fast, it'll actually make the crust in the middle kind of like explode up like a little volcano. And so what you wanna do is pour it slow to start out so that it doesn't make the crust come up from the bottom of the pan. And then I'm going to go ahead and scrape all this in. Now, if your batter can be close to the top, but you still need at least 1/4 inch from where your batter stops in the top of your pan. If you don't have that 1/4 inch, then you would want to take a little bit of batter out. It doesn't really rise much, but it will souffle a little bit. And then once it comes out of the oven, anything that souffles goes back down, but you need space for it to souffle a little tiny bit. And so mine has probably, and I'll try to show you here, it actually probably has about 3/4 inch, because this is a 3-inch high pan. So this is a rather tall pan, okay? And then make sure you taste some of your batter if you like cheesecake. This would be yummy. All right, so now from here, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and get some hot water, okay? And so I've got I'm probably only going to need like 1.5 of these. These are quart containers for my pan because my pan is kind of large. I talked about earlier where I could actually put 2 of these on here. But you're going to need some hot water from your spigot. So I'm going to go get hot water, find a jug or a container or something that you can put hot water in that you're going to be able to pour it into the tray once it's in the oven. So we're not pouring it in yet. So just hold your horses, but get some really, really hot water, as hot as you can out of your spigot, and just have it by your stove ready to go. I'll be right back. So I hope everyone's with me. So what I'm going to do, we talked about how my oven is at 375. So I'm going to open my oven. I'm not turning it down yet. I'm going to leave it at 375. I'm sitting my tray in here. Okay. So push it in as far as you can, but leave a little bit out so that you're going to be able to pour the water in. And then I'm going to go ahead and pour my water carefully so that there's about a 1/2 inch of water in whatever pan that you're using, that your cheesecake is sitting in. And we're going to talk about the foil. If you're using the springform pan, we need to talk about the foil. So just hold on for just a second. Once this is in, we're going to slide it in. Okay. We're going to close the oven, turn it down to 300. So just regular bake 300 and set the timer for 1 hour. Okay. So let's just review that. All right. So what you're going to do is you're going to put your pan into the oven with your cheesecake on it. You're going to fill it at least a 1/2 inch full of water, and you're going to carefully slide it in the rest of the way. Set a timer for 60 minutes. Make sure your oven is now at 300 degrees. Now, as far as the foil goes, if you are using a springform pan and not a cake pan, you need to tear off a decent sized piece of foil. That's going to be big enough to make a wall around the outside of your pan. So if this, let me show you here. So say my pan was sitting in the middle of this, I need to tear off a big piece of foil, make a wall around the outside of it. We're making like a foil fort. And then you're going to sit this on your pan. You're going to sit your cheesecake in the middle, and then you're going to put your water around the outside of it, not the inside. Okay. So a springform pan is nice. Whenever it's new, it works really, really well. And so you might not have a problem if it's a new pan. But as they get older and you wash them and you clip them and unclip them a few times, they get loose. And the water likes to leak into your cheesecake. And then your cheesecake doesn't set properly. So you're going to make a little wall with the foil, sit your pan in there, and then make sure you don't put any water inside your foil. You're just going to put it around the outside. Okay. When we're baking a custard like this, you know, the cheesecake's going to take longer than an hour. So 1 hour is the first amount of time before we check on it. So 300 degrees, no convection for 1 hour, and keep it closed. Don't let anyone open it because you need to keep that steam in there. You don't want it to crack. You don't want it to fall. So yeah, just kind of, I turn my oven light on so I can still look at it. And then we're going to shift it just a little bit after 60 minutes. The one that I cooked yesterday, you know, on your recipe, it says anywhere from 75 to 90 minutes. Mine took like 83 minutes yesterday that I baked in the same pan. Just to kind of give you a reference, it's definitely going to take longer than the 60 minutes. Okay. So for the raspberry coulis, and again, I just want to mention, like, the view I have up right now on the screen is me and the table. So if for some reason you cannot see the table, please let me know and I will spotlight that video so that you can see what is going on. So I've got a pot. I have some raspberries. I didn't quite have 10 to 12 ounces. I had more like 7.5. So I'm going to reduce my sugar a little bit. But basically, as far as the sugar goes, I put 2 ounces approximately. Typically, I sweeten my raspberry coulis to the amount that I like. And I like there to be a little bit of tartness. Tart is good, especially when we're eating it with a really sweet cheesecake. A little bit of tart with our fruit filling or our fruit coulis will be nice. So sweet that it doesn't like give you that cringe on the back of your jaw, but a little bit of tartness so that it's not too sweet. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my raspberries into my pot. I'm using frozen raspberries. Whenever you're making a sauce or a coulis or even like a cobbler or pie, frozen fruit is great. And so don't feel like you always have to have the fresh fruit, or you can use fruit that you picked whenever it was in season and then, make jam or sauce or something out of it later. There's nothing wrong with that. And so I'm going to go ahead and add about half the amount of sugar. So just to help get it cooking, adding sugar to fruit, especially berries, helps juice come off of it. And we want to get some juice off of this. So I'm going to add half of that sugar, and then I'm going to turn it on to a low heat. Okay. So if you're cooking on your electric eye or even your gas eye, you're going to do a little bit below medium, kind of between low and medium, and get this heating up slowly. When we're making a fruit coulis, or this is very much a type of sauce, we don't want to cook it too fast. We want there to be juice coming off of it. So you can see mine already has a lot of juice because they were frozen. And about 30 minutes before class started, I measured them out to see what I had. And so they've been sitting out since then. So they're a little bit frozen, but a lot of juice has started to form around them. And that's good. We want there to be juice. And we also want it to cook just a little bit to thicken the pectin. Yeah, you can do the same thing with strawberries. So someone's asking, can we do the same type of thing with strawberries? You sure can. Strawberries will, they lose their color a little bit, so it won't be quite as bright as the raspberry will be. But my kids love strawberries, and yeah, strawberries would be great. You could also do blackberry. But there is natural pectin in berries that help it thicken on its own. So we're actually not going to add anything to this. A coulis is very much more of a natural sauce that's a little bit runnier than what you would think of as like a fruit filling or a thicker type of sauce. This is going to be a thinner sauce that's used just to complement the dessert a little bit. And so I'm stirring this as I'm heating it. It's starting to steam. Fruit can burn really easily if we're not attentive to it. And so I'm just letting this heat. I am going to bring it to a slow simmer, and then I'm going to carefully taste it, see if I need to add any more of my sugar, because I only added half of it. And if I want to add a little more sugar, I will. And then we're really not going to heat it much more past that. Okay. So we're just warming the sugar and the fruit together, bringing it to a simmer, adjusting the sugar, and shutting it off. As this is coming to a simmer, I do want to show you that I'm going to be straining my sauce. Raspberry has a lot of seeds in it, and I actually might get one that's a little bit more fine. This is a fine metal sieve, but I have one that's a little bit finer that I might use. Something that the seeds are not going to be able to pass through. Whenever we're working with raspberries or blackberries, the seeds can be really hard. And whenever we're eating this nice, smooth, creamy custard that we made, and then we bite on a hard seed, it's just not enjoyable. All right, so I'm starting to simmer. I'm going to turn it all the way down. I actually might turn mine off since it only goes so low. And I'm going to carefully taste some of this. It has a little bit of cringe still left to it, especially if you're doing the raspberry. If you're doing strawberries are sweeter and you're not going to need as much sugar. And so I'm not adding all of my sugar that I had designated. I'm adding a little bit more, and I'm going to get a clean spoon. After this sugar gets dissolved, I'm going to try it again. So since I want a little bit of tartness, if I just add a little bit of sugar at a time now, hopefully I'll acquire that. Rather than like if you just dump in the rest and then it's too much, I guess you could add more raspberries if you have them to balance it out. All right. That's good. It's sweet. I'm not getting that cringe in my jaw, but I can still taste the raspberry really well, and it doesn't taste too sweet to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave out some of my sugar. You know, different types of fruit, not only different types have different amount of sugars in them, but also like different batches of raspberries will have different sweetener. So for me to say, oh, it's always going to be this amount is probably not true. Okay. So I'm going to get that finer sieve that I was talking about just to make sure that I get all my seeds out. And it will seem like you're wasting quite a bit because we will be tossing the seeds, but in the end, it's going to be a really nice, rich raspberry sauce. Okay, so let me move this over a little bit. So my heat is still off. So just to kind of recap, we heated the raspberries with half of the sugar until they came to a simmer. And then it really started boiling fast on me. So I shut my heat off and I tasted it. It needed a little more sugar. I adjusted the sugar. And so now it's definitely thick, but not as thick as like a filling for a pie would be. Okay. So just take a good look at that. We still want some liquid to it because this is a coulis. So I'm going to pour it. I have a bowl set up here with my sifter. That's important. And I'm going to go ahead and pour it into there. And then I'll show you how to help work that sauce through, because it'll seem like, well, this didn't make very much. But if you use the back of your spoon or your spatula or whatever you're using, you can actually start to press it through. So I'm going to take the back of my spatula and I'm going to actually start to press it down against my little strainer here. I call it a sifter a lot of times because we use it to sift flour in class, but we also use it to drain noodles and wash fruit and other things. So if you have something that's a little bit fine, if you don't, you are welcome to leave it as is and take the big pieces of fruit out of it. Hopefully you have something you can use, even if it's really small, you can use it to sift through. And so I'm pressing with the back because what will happen is the seeds will kind of like clog it so nothing else can pass through. So I scrape and then I press it through a little bit. Be careful how hard because you can still force those seeds through if you're doing it too hard. And then what you're going to end up with, and this is a very small batch, and mine was probably a little bit less than you had, depending on what size bag of raspberries. But you're going to end up with, and you can scrape. I'm going to use a clean spoon and scrape the bottom off of here so I don't lose any of this because it's stuck to the bottom of the strainer. And now I have a nice raspberry coulis. Okay, so mine probably made about a cup of sauce, which is a lot of sauce. You know, working in the industry as a pastry chef, whenever we would use sauce to plate up plates, you know, this amount of sauce would probably do close to like 35 to 40 plates of dessert. So it's actually quite a bit of sauce because it's not supposed to be the main show. It's supposed to complement. Okay, so that's our raspberry. So I'm going to let you finish that up and give it a nice taste, and it should be nice and smooth with very little seeds. You might have gotten a couple that sneaked through. I think I did. I think I saw maybe one or two at the top there. And so you can sit that off to the side. That'll be for you to kind of store. After it cools, I would store it in the refrigerator. And the same thing with the chocolate sauce. And then if you want to serve the fruit sauce cold, you certainly can. The chocolate sauce, you'll want to warm it a little bit. And we're going to get to that next. You'll want to warm the chocolate sauce a little bit after it's been in the refrigerator because it will thicken up. And that way it'll be a nice consistency to eat your cheesecake with. And, you know, honestly, you probably won't be eating cheesecake tonight. I wish you were here because I would give you some of my cheesecake, but you're not. So you'll most likely be eating cheesecake tomorrow unless you stay up super, super late. So go ahead and either wash your pot or get a clean pot to make your chocolate sauce in. Gather your ingredients. I also like to use a strainer for my chocolate sauce as well, because sometimes my cocoa powder will lump up in the sauce and I'll strain it at the very end. So if you need to wash your strainer or find something else, you'll have time to do that. And you're just gonna start gathering everything. And whenever you are ready to make your chocolate sauce, all right, I'm gonna just slowly start going over the ingredients for the chocolate sauce as you all are finishing getting ready to go. And so I have a clean pot here and I've got milk, okay? I have a little bit of butter, small little pat of butter, some heavy cream, the granulated sugar, and this is a really small batch, but this is gonna be what, close to 3/4 of a cup at least. And so if not close to a cup, which is a lot of sauce. Now, if you have a bigger family and they love chocolate sauce, this sauce is great on other desserts and ice cream as well. So this might be a sauce that you use often. And like I said, if you store it in the refrigerator, it'll last a long time. And then we have a little bit of corn syrup. Now, if you don't like using corn syrups, I understand you could use honey. You could also use maple syrup. And then I've got some chocolate as well, okay? And so just to show you the chocolate that I'm using, and a lot of you have seen this in my classes, I'm using the Ghirardelli 60% chocolate. This is a pure chocolate couverture. It's not chocolate chips. If chocolate chips is the only thing that you have at your house tonight, then go ahead and go for it. But I will say that pure chocolate does melt a little bit better than chocolate chips. Like if you ever tried to melt chocolate chips, it's really thick. So when we're trying to make a sauce and we're melting them, you know, it may not want to melt very well, but you'll still get some of that chocolate flavor. And since we're straining, if there's any lumps, they'll come out. But as far as a pure chocolate couverture, it has more fluidity to it. So when we melt it, it's more fluid. Chocolate chips, they add thickeners to them. So when the chocolate chip cookie comes out of the oven, it still looks like a chocolate chip inside the cookie. And so it doesn't get as melty. So these are called pistoles, these little round discs that I have. You can also buy this in a chocolate block and you could chop it up and use it that way as well. So this would be considered a semi-sweet chocolate. So just like the recipe says, this is a very easy recipe, but you have to be very careful because chocolate burns really easily. And we're putting chocolate in the pot, which basically breaks all rules that I always tell everybody in class. So you're gonna be stirring this pretty much the whole time. So you need a spoon or a wooden spoon or spatula, something. And you can go ahead and start putting all of your ingredients in here. I would not turn the heat on yet. Go ahead and put everything in and then we'll turn the heat on so that it can heat slowly and it can heat together while we're stirring it. And I'm gonna try to get everything scraped out really well. I actually have a smaller spatula here. This corn syrup, it's like you precisely measure, but then getting everything out of what you've measured into is very important. Okay. So again, we're on the chocolate sauce and we're adding all of the ingredients at one time and the heat is not on. And so I've got some cocoa powder and a little bit of butter. All right, so now that I have everything in the pot, now I'm going to go ahead and start heating it on the lowest setting, so very low heat. And I'm going to stir the whole entire time. And we talk about like stirring hot things cools it, but you know, chocolate burns really easily. So it's good that when we're stirring, it's cooling it because then hopefully it won't get too hot. So if at any time your burner starts to simmer your mixture or boil it, it needs to turn down or shut off for a little while. What we're doing right now is we're melting everything. After it's melted, we will bring it to a simmer, but we don't want that to happen before everything is melted. So when I say everything's melted, we're melting the, you know, the sugar, the butter, the chocolate that we just added. When it comes to a simmer, we might still have lumps of cocoa powder. but don't stress about that too much. So mine's still really lumpy. I'm heating it on the lowest setting, and it's slowly melting everything. And if at any point it starts to simmer or boil before everything melts, then you just want to shut your heat off for a little bit or turn it down. I'm going to turn mine down for a second because mine's not boiling, but it's starting to steam pretty heavily. So I'm going to turn it off for a second, let it finish melting everything. Like I said, since we're heating chocolate, the pure chocolate and the cocoa powder straight in the pot, and it's not a double boiler, it could burn really easily. Now, if you're like, I burn everything, then if you want to put it into a bowl and heat it over a double boiler to melt it, you certainly can do that. It'll just take a lot longer. Or you can just stir it the whole time and be really careful. Boy, it smells good. Maybe I should have listed like ice cream on this class also. And then that way you would have had something to enjoy your sauces with until your cheesecake was ready, right? Okay, I'm turning my heat back on. I'm completely melted. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn my heat back on, lowest setting again. I'm gonna let it start to simmer just a little bit, hopefully just around the edges, and then I'm gonna shut it off and it'll be done. We're not gonna let it boil for any amount of time, just a simmer. And when I say simmer, that means really small bubbles around the outside edge that are just starting. And you're gonna shut the heat off whenever you see that happen. Oh, it smells so good. It's not quite there yet. Yours might be, and if yours is simmering, go ahead and shut it off. And then we're gonna end up straining it the same way we did the raspberry coulis. All right, there it is. And I'm gonna shut mine off. Sometimes to be able to tell if it is boiling or simmering, you have to stop for a second, stop the stirring, and that's going to give you a better understanding of what it's doing. So I paused for a second here and there, and then I was able to see that it was simmering just a little bit, and I shut it off. Okay. And now I'm going to go ahead and strain my chocolate sauce just to get rid of any lumps that are in there. Sauces are typically strained just so you get a really nice, smooth sauce on your plate. And you don't see any lumps with the sauce. And in this case, it's just going to be cocoa powder, or it should be, unless you used a different type of chocolate. Okay, so you can see, let me show you here, you can see a little bit of cocoa powder that was in my strainer. Okay, and so I'm just going to get rid of that. Scrape off the bottom so I don't lose any of my sauce. And then definitely don't be afraid to try your sauce. Just don't burn your mouth. It's always so good. This could also be made with milk chocolate or a bittersweet chocolate. If you like it more bitter, you can get a more bitter chocolate. If you like it a little sweeter, you could do milk chocolate. Milk chocolate has a lot of cocoa butter in it, so it's going to be a lot lighter in color. It might not look as chocolatey. And depending on the type of cocoa powder you're using, will give you a richer flavor. I always recommend using cocoa powder that's a little bit better quality, like a Ghirardelli, or I use the Cocoa Berry brands, or even the Hershey's Special Dark is going to give you a more rich, intense flavor than just regular cocoa powder. So you can see the sauce, even the chocolate sauce when it's hot has a little bit of thickness to it, but it's nice to eat with the cheesecake. And again, this sauce is good warm. So if you were to reheat this, a good way to do it would be the double boiler, like I mentioned. You know, you put about 1 inch of water in a pot, sit this on the top of the pot, and slowly melt it. Or if you have a microwave, you could just do a few seconds in your microwave. Just be really careful so you don't burn the chocolate. So this was the same exact cheesecake, same exact pan. And this is what it looked like whenever it was done. So a cheesecake, whenever it's done, it really shouldn't have a lot of browning. And as long as you had water in the pan the whole time, and we're going to talk about that when it goes off after an hour. Not only do we need to rotate a little bit, but we need to check to see if there's still water in the pan. If all the water has evaporated, we need to add a little bit more water at that point. But as long as there's water in the pan, it shouldn't crack on the top. And cooking it at a low temperature, it shouldn't brown at all either. And so what I did is I let the cheesecake cool, and then I put it into the freezer. Now, I could have baked this cheesecake this morning and popped it in the freezer for a couple of hours until it got nice and firm. I went ahead and put it in the freezer yesterday since I wouldn't be back until we did class tonight. And so it's pretty frozen. I took it out about 10 minutes ago, and it's still nice and firm, still frozen. And so I'm going to show you how you take it out of the pan. And I really like using this method because, well, for one, you don't have to worry about your springform pan leaking when you just use a cake pan that you already have. But also, cutting the cheesecake partially frozen, you get a really good cut from the cheesecake. So what I usually do is I'll take it out of the pan and then let it sit for like another 15, 20 minutes. And then I'll cut it. And when it's a little bit frozen and I cut it, it just cuts really nice. And then by the time that it's cut into a slice, it thaws really, really fast at that point, okay? And so what I'm gonna do is I need a few things for this. So I have 2 plates here that are gonna be big enough for my cheesecake to go on. I have some granulated sugar, and I'm gonna go over to the stovetop here. So I'm gonna bring that camera over. So let me just spotlight the camera, and we're gonna come over here. So whether you have an electric eye or a gas burner, this would work, okay? So what you would do is go ahead and turn, and I need a paring knife too, and here's my paring knife, okay? So what you would do is you would turn your burner on, okay? And I turn it to medium, and you're gonna start to rotate your pan. I know this sounds a little dangerous, but it's frozen, so it's not gonna light anything on fire. This is very, very cold. So what we're doing is we're rotating our pan over the flame, okay? Or if you have an electric burner, that'll work too. And we're basically melting some of the butter from that crust on the bottom. And I'm just making sure you can see on my screen. And I'm just softening the edges, okay? And now I'm gonna take it off. I better put a trivet down so I don't damage our marble here. And I'm gonna bring it over. I'll shut the burner off for a second, but I'll have to go back on there. I'm gonna take the paring knife, and I'm gonna carefully go down into the pan, okay? And then rather than moving the knife around the pan, I'm gonna move the pan and keep the knife like right here, okay? Sometimes when we go around the outside of a pan like this, it'll cut into our cake or a cheesecake. So the idea is hold the knife pretty much stationary, bouncing up and down, and go the whole way around, okay? And you gotta remember, this is suctioned in here right now. So I'm cutting around the outside edge after I softened it, okay? And then I'm gonna go ahead and put it back on the heat one more time. Make sure I get it nice and softened on the bottom, which I definitely put it on there enough the first time because I was able to do that cutting around the outside edge. Okay, I'm loosening it, and now I'm gonna see if it's ready to come out. So what you're gonna do probably tomorrow, I'm guessing at this point for you all. You will sprinkle granulated sugar on the top. Okay, that's going to help create a barrier so that whenever you turn the cheesecake over, it's not going to stick onto the plate and tear the top of it off. So I'm just doing a sprinkling over the whole entire cheesecake. And now what I'm going to do is put the plate over top of it. Okay, and the edges of my cake pan are not hot. It was so cold that it's not, even heating it, it's not, it might be hot on the bottom, but not on the top. And so now I'm going to go ahead and flip it over carefully and see if it's going to unsuction. It is. Great. So it came off. It looks like it left a little bit of my graham cracker in the bottom. Not bad, but I might be able to pull this out and put it back in place. Okay, make sure the paper is still in the pan, not on your cheesecake. So the paper came off on its own because I had it sprayed. And now I'm going to go ahead and take another plate, or if you have cake cardboards, you could do this on cake cardboards. Put another plate on the top, sandwich it together, and slowly turn it over. And you have your cheesecake out of the pan. Okay. And then if your edges got squished a little bit, you can come through since it's frozen and you can kind of smooth them back out, but it looks pretty good. And then, like I said, I like to cut this while it's still frozen. So I'm going to set a timer for 15 minutes. And hopefully I didn't make you all dizzy. Sorry about that. I hit the table. But what I'm going to do is set a timer for 15 minutes. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll show you how to cut your cheesecake, okay? So we have a little bit of time here. Some of the pastry classes, we're waiting for stuff to bake so that you can kind of see the process. So my cheesecake actually has 15 minutes left on it also in the oven. So in 15 minutes, I'm going to show you how to carefully rotate your cheesecake. And I'm also going to show you how to cut the cheesecake into slices. My timer went off. So hopefully we've got everybody gathered back together. I'm going to show you my cheesecake after it's been in the oven for 1 hour. And so I'm going to just show you what I typically do. Now, remember, I have gloves on. I've also been working in the pastry industry for 22 years. So my fingertips are a little bit tough. So be careful just reaching into your oven. You might want hot pads to do this. I usually just use my fingertips. So let me show you what we're going to do here. And so I'm going to carefully, and I might pull mine out just a little bit so you all can see a little bit better. But typically I would just leave my pan right where it is and reach in there. But if you have a rack above, you might want to be careful doing that. But I'm going to carefully inch it out. I still have lots of water in my pan. I still have at least a ½ inch. I might have put more than that in my pan. But I'm just going to do a little rotation so that the part of the cheesecake that was in the back is now going to be in the front. And you can also see, let me get a little bit closer with this. I'm going to try not to make anybody dizzy here. Okay. So hopefully everyone is with me so that you can see this. But this is after 1 hour. So if I push this, can you see how it's really moving? It's like I have a little ripple effect going on in the middle. So it's not completely set yet. Okay, so what we're looking for is it actually to move all together with no little ripple effect. And that's how we'll know when it's done. Also, another good little tip for knowing when it's done is that it's going to have, I'm going to move this slowly so I don't make anyone dizzy. It's going to have these tiny little cracks around the very outside edge of the cheesecake. So when you look really close, a lot of times they'll have little cracks. But as you wiggle your cheesecake in the oven, like just now, I pushed it just a little bit and I had a little bit of some of the batter in the middle of the custard that was rippling and everything wasn't moving together. So I'm going to go ahead and set, so that was just 60 minutes. I'm gonna go ahead and set another 12 because I think mine might be close to done. So I'm gonna show you all, I'm hoping that my cheesecake has thawed enough to show you all cutting it. So I like to use hot water for this. In pastry, we cut a lot of desserts with hot water. And we don't necessarily, I know this sounds funny, but we don't use the water part of it. We use the warmth from it. So I'm going to use a chef knife. So you're going to want a decent size knife to cut through this. I mean, this is longer than what I need, but you want something that's a little bit larger to cut through. And I'm going to dip it in the hot water. I'm warming my knife is what I'm doing. And then I did go get a clean towel so that this wasn't the towel that I was wiping my batter on. And I'm warming this and I'm going to dry it off. Okay. And so now my knife is warm, but it's not wet. And I'm going to go ahead and do my first cut. I'm going to cut straight down. And then you're not going to pull straight up because that'll bring crumbs with it. You're going to pull off to the side. Okay. Off to the side and pull it out. So then that way you have a clean cut with it. All right. So let me show you that again, because to cut a piece, you need to cut again. So now I'm going to clean my knife off in my hot water. I'm getting it warm again. I'm going to wipe and I'm going to go ahead and cut. Okay. And that's the trick. People ask me all the time, how do you get your desserts cut so nicely that there's no crumbs and there's, no mess? And so sometimes we cut things partially frozen like I am right now, but we always use hot water. Okay, so I'm getting it hot and I'm drying it off. So I just cut 2 pieces there. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and pull one of those pieces out and put it on the plate so that you can see. And since it's frozen, it tries to reseal. So let me just, give this some help here. Okay. And then at this point, it's halfway thawed. And now it's going to go ahead and finish thawing the rest of the way within 10 minutes, probably. Some people like their cheesecake really cold, so it just depends on how you like your cheesecake served. But typically it is served cold because it's a custard that has to be refrigerated. And so you can see the nice crust bottom. It's nice and thick, so you'll have plenty of crust to eat with your cheesecake. But yet it cuts really nicely, not only because it's frozen, but it also has that flour in there that helps thicken everything. And so now with your sauces, typically these are not sauces that you would like drizzle over the top of your dessert, but that's completely up to you. It would be a sauce that you would puddle on the side. A lot of times thinner sauces like we made tonight that are strong and nice and complimentary, if you drizzle it over the top, it just kind of looks yucky because it's not thick enough to hold its shape. But as far as the raspberry goes, you can put a little bit on the plate whenever you serve it. I'm always cleaning my edges of my plates off. Okay. So yeah, you can see the raspberry. It's nice and shiny. I'll put a little chocolate on the other side so that you can see it. All right. The chocolate's a little thicker. So if you wanted to put it in a squeeze bottle, you could. A lot of times dessert sauces we put into a squeeze bottle or a little piping bag and we pipe it out, but you can drizzle that one a little bit. And a coulis typically puddles or runs a little bit, and you don't really worry about that because it's a thinner sauce. Okay. So that just gives you an example of the 2 sauces that we made and how to cut your cheesecake, how to take your cheesecake out of the pan. I'm going to show you an easy way to make individual cheesecakes. All right. So you can also take this batter, since we're waiting for a couple minutes and mine's about to go off. I just thought I'd show you one more thing. So you can take a muffin pan, line it with cupcake papers. And I don't do graham cracker crust for this. I just use the crumb. And so I've got some extra crumbs here. And I put a tablespoon of graham cracker crumb in the bottom. and I pack it down a little bit. So it's just the crumb. It's not the crust we made with the butter. I just do straight crumb. And then you can actually pour cheesecake batter in here until it's like a quarter of an inch to the top. And whenever you bake it in a small pan like this, it's kind of cool. You don't have to use a water bath. Okay. So the water that we put in the bottom of the pan, that would be called a water bath. And whenever you bake them in the cupcakes, they're so small that they don't have to be done in a water bath. So you can do all the cupcake papers, put a tablespoon of just straight graham cracker crumb in the bottom, put your batter in there. You want to pack it down a little bit. Put your batter in there, let them bake. They take about 28-ish minutes to set, but then you have individual cheesecakes. After they refrigerate, you're actually able to peel back the paper and eat it like a little tiny cheesecake, or take the paper off of it and put it on a plate. It actually works really, really well. Whenever we would make cheesecake for buffet, this is how we would do it so that it wouldn't get sticky and messy. We would just have it in the individual cups, and people just loved it. And then you could put a little sauce on the top if you wanted to, or whipped cream. All right, let's go ahead and get my cheesecake, okay? So let's bring my camera over here. All right, we're gonna open the oven here. Okay, pull this out carefully. Sometimes the hard part, you can't see. Okay, hold on. Sometimes I have to do fancy maneuvering since I don't have my buddy Ted. Okay, so Ted is still with us, by the way, but he's just not here for my virtual classes. I'm all grown up now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shake it, see if it's all moving together, and it is. It's all moving together now. And I'm going to be careful not to dip my hot pads into the water. And I carefully lift it out and put it in a safe spot to cool. And then carefully just close this back up. And I'm going to let the water cool, and I'll take that out tomorrow. And so I'm going to shut my oven off so that I'm not burning my pan and it can finish. But this is the final cheesecake. And it's important to let our pastries cool before we put them into the refrigerator or the freezer. Because if we put something hot like this into the refrigerator, it'll actually end up heating everything in your refrigerator or freezer and bring the temperature down for too long. And so it is important for us to let it cool. I would say at least 30 minutes, if not more. If you're going to be up a little bit later than that, you could let it sit for even 2 hours. And then you're going to put it, if you have it in a cake pan, I would just pop it in the freezer so that you're going to be able to take it out tomorrow. And if it's in a springform pan, you could go ahead and put it in the refrigerator, and then you can unclip the springform tomorrow after it has set. Okay, so let me go ahead and come back here. I just want to thank you all for being here this evening. It has been a lot of fun. And I hope I've given you some tips and some recipes that you're going to be able to use again. But I'm excited for you all to try your cheesecake too. And I wish I could magically give you some through the computer. That's the hardest part about the virtual classes. Not only am I here by myself, but also I can't share what I'm making with you all. So I hope you enjoy class. It's nice that we're able to do it virtually, and you'll be able to enjoy some cheesecake.